So today we're going to be breaking down a beat for someone like CLAIRO inside of FL Studio. So for the first two sounds in the melody, I went ahead and layered a piano and a Rhodes together. So for the piano, I grabbed the Wing Upright Honky Tonk from Keyscape. And for the Rhodes, I grabbed the LA Custom Old Sampler, again from Keyscape. And here's what those sound like once they're layered together. So then for the MIDI for that main piano, overall it's a pretty simple progression that uses two chords in the C major scale. So I started off by laying out this C major 7th chord. And then for that first chord in the melody, I just transposed it a little bit like I do in a lot of those darker textured melodies. So I went ahead and grabbed that chord, put it up 5, and then went ahead and grabbed this middle note and put it down an octave. Now as you can see, the two chords match and they sound the same as well. After that, really all I did was chop it up and then strum and randomize it a little bit to give it a more human feel. I also added a very simple top line that just uses 3 notes, as well as a bass line that I kind of heard in my head once I was playing the chords over and over again. Really the goal for this was just to keep it very simple because I thought the sound selection was really going to carry the pattern. Really the honky tonk had a really nice harsh start to it and almost kind of sounded shaky and distorted. So once it got pitched down, it gave me that darker pitched down sampled sound that I was really going for. Along with the sound selection really helping out the melody, the effects were great too. For the first effect, I grabbed Ferox on the hot recording preset, then Fruity Flangus on the default preset with the mix turned down to about 25%, then Fruity Reverb 2 on the small room preset, then Fruity Fast Distort on the fuzz preset with the mix turned down to about 5%, then an EQ just to cut the lows and kind of boost them a little bit as well, and then finally a Fruity Compressor on the vintage preset. Then once that was rendered out, I added one more effect that I added an automation clip to, so I grabbed Gross Beat on the Tremolo Slow preset and then again automated that. So then like I mentioned, I rendered that out. So once I did, I started off by pitching it down 6 to again kind of get that darker and more sampled down sort of sound, which worked really well. After that, I went ahead and changed the mode to stretch and then automated the pitch knob so I could have some pitch sweeps and little detune things going on in the melody. So then starting off with the automation clips, like I mentioned, I started off by automating that pitch knob and I just have a little downward pitch sweep at the end of every 2 bars. Then for the second automation clip, it's just the gross beat on the tremolo, so as a chord plays it gets more and more shaky, kind of just emphasizing that kind of older feeling to it that I think worked really well in the melody. Moving on to the MIDI for the Rhodes, it's pretty much just a copy and paste of the first melody without the top line and the bass notes. Then for the effects on that Rhodes, I grabbed again Fruity Reverb 2, but this time on the Cathedral preset, then Fruity Chorus on the default preset, then again Fruity Fast Distort on the fuzz preset with the mix turned down to about 5%, then an EQ just to boost the highs, and then finally an EQ just to cut all the lows. The last thing I want to mention is what I did to the honky tonk piano inside of Omnisphere. So if I plan on pitching a piano down in my melody, a lot of the times I'll go back into Keyscape and before I render it out, I'll turn up all of the dynamics and the performance settings inside of Keyscape. So hopping back into Omnisphere, you can see that I turned up the release noise all the way, turned up the pedal noise all the way, and then also turned up the dynamics all the way. It kind of makes it almost hyper realistic in a sense to where you wouldn't really hear these clicks and clacks if you were listening to a piano in person, but in my opinion, it just sounds really cool to get all of those little artifacts and then pitch it down. It always just works really well and I like doing it in my melodies. Moving on to the next sounds, I went ahead and layered 2 from Omnisphere together to kind of create a high texture for the melody. So for the first one, it was this Rhodes piano called 1946 Pre-Piano, and then for the second one, it was the Tension Times Playable Texture from Omnisphere. So here's what those sound like once they're combined together. So starting off with the MIDI for that 1946 Rhodes piano, again, very simple, and it just laid out this pattern that's almost pretty much kind of a clap pattern. Like a lot of my accent or high texture melodies, a lot of the times Portal does a lot of the heavy lifting and making the sound come alive, and that's exactly what happened in this melody as well. So for the effects on that, I just ran it through the same effect chain that the main piano went through, but again, like I mentioned, I added Portal on the Glacier preset with the mix turned to 100%. And then moving on to the MIDI for the playable texture, I just laid out this super repetitive pattern, playing it out on the keyboard. Since I made this in C major, that's just all the white notes on the MIDI keyboard, so it's pretty easy to just kind of mess around and find top lines and other interesting little bits that you can use. So then for the effects on that, I ended up just running it through both of my guitar pedals, so I started off by running it through the mood. So then starting off with the mood, I went ahead and changed it to slip, then I have the modify dial all the way to the left, and then the time dial about all the way to the right. Then for the second side, I have it on tape, and again, the dials are kind of almost in the middle. The modify one is just a little to the left, and then the length one is just a little bit to the right. After that, I went ahead and used the blooper on the sampler mode, and I went ahead and recorded it into the blooper. Then for mod A, I had preset 2, which I believe is dropper, which just kind of causes the melody to drop out a little randomly. Then I went ahead and added stability, which is basically just detune, and I have that pretty much turned all the way up. And then finally for modifier B, I went ahead and have it on preset 4, which I believe is stepped speed. So I just went ahead and sped it up just a tiny bit. Then next up in the melody, I went ahead and added two sounds that I would consider kind of more top line melodies and not really textures. So I started off by grabbing this spin pluck one shot that is a super dry sounding sound. Then secondly, I grabbed the winter pluck preset out of Omnisphere. So here's what those sound like once they're layered together. Then moving on to the MIDI for the spin synth, I don't really have a good way to tell you how I came up with this because like I mentioned before, I just kind of messing around on the keyboard since it was in C major. It really does make it super easy to just kind of play random stuff and kind of figure stuff out as you go, and it's almost kind of more fun figuring it out that way as well, opposed to just clicking stuff in. So for these next two patterns, I don't really know what happened, I was just kind of messing around. And then here's that MIDI for the winter pluck, and again, same thing, don't really know what happened, just was kind of messing around on the MIDI keyboard and figuring stuff out. Moving on to the effects on those, for the spin synth, I didn't add anything and just kept it dry. And then for the winter pluck, I just added Portal on the cassette tape preset with the mix turned down to about 10%. Finally, for the bass sounds in the melody, I went ahead and layered two together. So I started off by grabbing this acoustic bass one shot, and then I went ahead and layered that with the clipped sines bass from Omnisphere. So here's what those sound like once they're played together. Starting off with the acoustic bass, it's a bass pattern, so it just copied the bass notes from the original MIDI. Then for that sub bass, the MIDI again is pretty much the same thing, and it just copies the bass notes. With this, I just kind of filtered out all the highs, so the acoustic bass and the sub bass could be playing at the same time and kind of meshed together. So then moving on to the effects for those, like I mentioned on that sub bass, I just went ahead and added an EQ to cut all of the highs and then boost the lows, and then I went ahead and kept the acoustic bass dry because I thought it sounded really nice just as it is. So then finally for the finishing touch on the melody, I just went ahead and added two textures from a kit that I've been working on for a really long time. So it's kind of a more vinyl sounding texture and then one that's just kind of a white noise texture. So here's what those end up sounding like. After that texture, I went ahead and rendered everything together. So here's what everything sounds like once it's combined. Drums for the melody, this is probably going to be the most lackluster part of the tutorial because I've never really made drums like this. So I started off by just grabbing this little drum break loop that I found in one of my one-shot kits. So the first thing I added to it was a snare, so I went ahead and grabbed this Internet Girl snare and I just layered it with what the drum pattern was already playing. Then I went ahead and grabbed a drum and texture. Again, it's from that kit that I've been working on for years. After that, I grabbed another drum loop from that same kit that I've been working on, and I just kind of grabbed one open hi-hat from it and kind of filtered it out and used the crossfading features to get it to sound the way I wanted it to. After that, I went ahead and added a kick and a hi-hat. The hi-hat is just a 2-step, and the kick is on a 4-step. Then I went ahead and added a open hat ride to the first beat of every 4 bars. And then for the final touch, I just added a little clap here at the end. So yeah, after those drums, the melody was done, and that's going to be pretty much it for the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I don't really make stuff in this style, but I really like the way this turned out. Thought it sounded pretty snazzy, and that album was super good. Thought it would kind of fit into it. But yeah, it's gonna be pretty much it. My poison ivy's gone. I don't know when this is gonna come out, but in one video I talked about my poison ivy being a real detriment to my sleep. That's now gone. This is very positive. But yeah, that's gonna be pretty much it. Yep, bye.